So in this video, we're going to be talking about writing an interpretive paper. This is information that you're going to need for any of the papers that you write for this course. So this pertains, in other words, to any of the written assignments that you're doing for this course, and theoretically for any other history paper, because ultimately what you're doing when you're writing a history paper is expressing an opinion. And this is the vital thing that is extremely important, is that you need to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're writing, it is expressing an opinion, it is making an argument. And you need to do this by stating clearly what it is that you want to convince the reader of, an explicit statement of opinion, known as the thesis statement, and then to convince your reader of that opinion through the use of evidence and the interpretation of that evidence. And this is the thing. This is the meat and potatoes of history. This is how historians work. This is how the past is understood. Because as I've already outlined, there are no facts in history. All of our evidence is flawed. All of our evidence is partial, selected, damaged, subject to bias, subject to point of view, and as a result, our understanding of history has to come from historians making an argument, interpreting the flawed and damaged evidence that we have. And in no case is this more true than in ancient history, where the evidence is the most randomly present, randomly missing, selected, damaged, subjected to every different kind of the problems of evidence that we've described. And so what we need to do is to have a strategy for interpreting history. This is what we talk about in this video. This is discussed in even greater detail in the pamphlet Writing a Position Paper, which is handed out in class and also available on the website in PDF form. So the basic idea here is that what you're doing is interpretation. The action that you are undertaking is interpreting history, making an argument. And so this consists of three components. First of all, what is the problem? You're starting with a question. This is something that historians might argue about. Why did such and such a thing happen? Or, did such and such a thing constitute a great idea or a bad idea on the part of an historical individual? Or what were the effects of such and so? So it could be something that historians argue about, or it could be something that people of the time might have argued about. For the Romans, for example, the Romans might have argued, amongst themselves over whether to pursue aggressive imperial expansion in the east once their nemesis, Carthage, had been eliminated as a threat. So you have to start with a question, a specific question, and you need to be clear on what that question is. It needs to be part of what you're addressing. It needs to be, it needs to be expressed before you can go any further in the paper. The second thing is, what are the possible answers? It needs to have, different possible resolutions, your problem. If there's only one possible answer, then there's no point in writing the paper. There's nothing being accomplished. No interpretation is taking place. If no one could rationally disagree with the point that you're trying to make, something straightforward like if you're trying to argue that The Clouds is a play that was performed in Athens, nobody is going to disagree with that. If you're going to project something, try to argue something radical, like Julius Caesar was actually a space alien, then you're in a real position to make a paper that will make a tremendous amount of waves. The more provocative, the more outlandish your position is, the more attention it's going to get, the more impact it's going to have on its reader, the more it's going to change our understanding of history, if, of course, you have the evidence to back up your assertions. But you start with your argument, and then ensure that what it is that you are trying to argue, your answer to the question, is then something that you convince your reader of through the use of through the presentation of evidence and your interpretation of that evidence. So, for example, this is the example that I use in the pamphlet. Did Hannibal make a mistake in using elephants as a part of his attempted conquest of the Romans in the Second Punic War, in one of the most climactic episodes of Roman history? And elephants, war elephants, had been used extensively in the past. The question is, did it make sense for Hannibal to use elephants as a part of his invasion of Italy? So, this is our problem. This is our question. Did Hannibal's elephants make a difference? Was it something that was rewarded for the effort that was put into the monumental task of bringing 37 elephants across the Alps into Italy? Then you have possible rational answers to your problem. That it was important to the invading army, that it was useful in intimidating the Romans, or conversely that they did more harm than good. And then you present your own thesis, you present your own argument, what it is that you are going to prove in this paper. And this is by far the most vital part of whatever it is that you write, whether it's a short essay or a term paper. The absolute crux of what it is that you're doing is this statement. And it needs to be a firm statement of opinion that someone could disagree with. And it needs to be specific and grounded in the reasons why you are making the statement. You don't need to go into detail, but being able to say, I believe that Hannibal's use of elephants is a mistake, is a start on a thesis statement, but is relatively weak, because what you're doing is trying to grab the reader and say, this is something that it is reasonable to believe. This is something that is a rational interpretation of history. And so you give a brief summary of the reasons why that this is going to be true, and then you're going to present those reasons in further detail in the rest of the paper. So you need to have a thesis statement that is a statement of opinion that someone could disagree with, and then part of that is giving a taste of why it is that your thesis statement is going to be shown to be valid to the reader. Then, once you have that provides your structure for the paper. That provides the rest of what you're going to be doing. So the body of your paper is showing why your thesis statement is valid. And generally speaking, historians love the rule of three reasons why. It feels convincing. 3 reasons why shows the reader that this is viable. This is sometimes referred to as the 3 pillars. And so it can be 3 different kinds of things, depending on what it is that you're arguing, 3 different aspects of your problem, 3 different reasons why the thesis is true, or 3 different steps in showing that it's true. Or it can be 3 different examples of what it is that you're trying to say. And so, the structure in this example, Hannibal made a mistake, is my thesis. And then the body of the paper is going to be determined by the 3 assertions that support that. That in general, elephants were not a bad idea, that they had been used successfully in the past. B, that adaptability was a key trait of the Romans, and and see that it was Roman adaptability, the fact that they adapted to the use of elephants that ultimately made them ineffective in Hannibal's conquest of Italy. So your structure of the paper is laid out, the three pillars, the three assertions, and then at the end of the paper, there are two things that tie it up. The first is to deal with whatever it is that a reader might be thinking of that would be a counterargument, that would be something that someone would say to disagree with you. For example, if you were trying to argue that the Romans were fundamentally a peaceful people, and that their efforts to create an empire was nothing but beneficial to the peoples that they ruled over, and so forth. The reader is going to be thinking, well, but hey, what about all those people that the Roman legions killed? Or say that you're talking about the Greeks never created an empire, that the Greek city-state always remained independent and autonomous. The reader is going to be thinking, the reader who has studied Greek history is going to be thinking, well, hey, what about the Athenian Empire? Why was that not really an empire? And so the point is, the strongest paper is going to be one that not one that ignores that counterargument, but one that grips it firmly and shows why it doesn't pertain, that destroys the counterargument, as well as making positive arguments in defense of the thesis if you destroy your enemy's position as well. Think of this as you're holding a debate with some other person on a stage. You can think of it as war and do it in a Sun Tzu kind of way. Well, however you want to think about it. But it's not enough to make positive arguments in support of your thesis. You also need to destroy the arguments that someone would be using, because otherwise, if a reader is thinking of that argument, he's just going to read through the whole paper and thinking the whole time, but what about X? But what about X? He's going to get to the end of your paper. You've made your argument, and he's still thinking, but what about X? You've completely failed. And then your conclusion ties together all of this. It goes through each of your assertions, your three assertions, and your counterargument, whatever that may be, and shows how each of these things supports your overall thesis and shows that your thesis is a valid argument. And so your structure overall of your interpretive paper looks something like this. You have an introduction that states the problem and gives the possible answers, and then explicitly states your thesis of what it is that you're going to be arguing and the hints of why it's true. And then you show in each section, you describe your evidence and then discuss it. And then you describe your evidence for your second assertion and discuss it. And then you make your third assertion, describe the evidence, and discuss how the evidence supports your assertion. And then at the end of the paper, you link them all together and demonstrate that you've shown that your thesis statement is effective. In making your argument, your assertions need to be supported by evidence. This evidence needs to come from primary sources or secondary sources or both. Tertiary sources are not allowed in any history paper, certainly in any history paper for me. And this means that you are not allowed to use textbooks, encyclopedias, almost everything on the internet is a tertiary source, with the exception of A, online scholarly journals, and B, transcriptions of primary sources. But everything else, any other web page that you're going to be looking at, whatever it talks about, whatever it says about it, however detailed it looks, it's probably a tertiary source. If you have a question about it, you can ask me, but ultimately this means that almost everything on the internet you cannot use. You need to use primary sources or secondary sources, because tertiary sources are garbled compromises They eliminate all of the arguments, positions. They're the most distorted, furthest from the events, the evidence that we have. And then you need to show all of your evidence. You need to show where it comes from. And so this means that all of your evidence needs to be properly cited using footnotes and bibliography. The reason for this is that your reader needs to be able to track down the evidence that you provided in order to read further, in order to find out more about what it is that you're talking about, for his or her own reasons. And B, you need to demonstrate a distinct difference between what is your thinking and what is someone else's thinking. So if you have information, if you're reading a book by Professor Jones says, hey, the Athenian Empire wasn't really an empire for this, that, and the other reason. And, you write in your paper, hey, the Athenian Empire is not an empire for this, that, and the other reason. If you don't cite Professor Jones's book, which is where you got it from, that's fraud. That's intellectual dishonesty. That's plagiarism. And not only will that have academic consequences for this paper and this course, but it's fundamentally dishonest. And so the profession of history has a rigorous process of ensuring that everything that's not your own opinion, your interpretation, has to be explicitly cited, has to be linked back to where it comes from. And so, each section under each assertion involves making an assertion, describing the evidence, giving any secondary material that is in support of this, and then discussing it, showing how your evidence from the primary source to the secondary source, or both, is showing the value of your assertion. So the best way to do this is to make your assertion first. At the beginning of each section of the body of your paper. Just make your assertion, and then describe your evidence, and then show how that evidence, make a discussion of how that evidence supports your thesis. And this also has a way as a useful side effect of making a nice distinction between your evidence that it has your citations and so forth, and then you go on to your discussion of it. Which is clearly in your voice and clearly your interpretation. And we'll continue this in the next video.